Screening Series 2, How Background Screening Saves Time, Money, and Your Brand. My name is Jenny Drinker. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances here at People Matter, and I'll be your moderator today. Just want to cover a few basic housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. All you have to do is type yours into the question window on the GoToWebinar control panel off to the right there and hit submit. We'll get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A session after the main presentation. Second, I wanted to let you know we are recording today's webinar, so we'll post that on the People Matter website within the next 24 hours. And once it's up, we'll send you an email in case you want to watch it again or forward it along to a friend. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First, we have John Pate, President and CEO of LS Screening. We also have Tim Dillon, who is a Senior Sales Engineer at People Matter. And it turns out we have a slight change of plans for Chris Gann from Double B's. He actually is 40,000 feet in the air right now on a plane, but no big deal. We have some great stats and ROI numbers that Chris has asked us to share with you all, and so we'll be sharing those during the webinar. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about John. John is a 30-year veteran of business operations, human resources, and training. He formed LS Screening in 2003, which currently supports more than 500 clients in 45 states. Last year, John began leading webinars about the hiring process and the fundamentals of background checks. His book, Your Data, helps job seekers understand how personal data is used in background checks. And John's website, fantastichr.com, is a valuable resource for the HR community. And I'd also like to tell you a little bit about our own Tim Dillon. Tim joined People Matter in April 2011 with more than 11 years of experience in sales and marketing. As a senior sales engineer at People Matter, Tim serves as a liaison between the sales, product, and marketing teams and the primary sales enablement contact, helping to increase productivity and efficiency. He supports more than 30 core and enterprise sales team members, providing extensive product knowledge, conducting in-depth demos, and traveling on-site for sales meeting and industry events throughout the year. So now you may be wondering, what's the relationship between Double B's, LS Screening, and People Matter? So I'd like to tell you a little bit about that as well. Double B's has actually been a People Matter customer since June 2012 and has been using the Hire module of the People Matter platform with great success and impressive ROI numbers. As I mentioned, we're going to share those ROI numbers with you during the webinar. At People Matter, we're lucky to have an industry-leading customer like Double B's, and so we're happy to have them as a customer. For LS Screening, People Matter actually partnered with LS Screening in 2010, and we partnered to offer our customers an effective and thorough solution for background screening. LS Screening's background checks are fully integrated into People Matter Hire to provide a seamless experience for both applicants and hiring managers. At People Matter, we really enjoy working with LS Screening. John and his team are an invaluable resource to us and really are a true partner. They're always flexible and responsive in working with our clients. And as the person who manages our partnerships, I am very fortunate to work with LS Screening and their team daily to provide our customers with such a valuable joint offering. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to John Pate. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny, and good morning to our friends in the Pacific and Mountain Time, and good afternoon to the East Coast and to the Central Time Zone. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. On your screen, you see a couple of photographs that illustrate a little bit about what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes. Trying to cover background checks in 20 minutes is somewhat akin to drinking from a fire hose. And I talk fast. I'll try to get as much information as I can, but by all means, keep your questions coming. I have at the bottom, you'll see that I describe myself as a recovering restaurateur. And actually, my first job out of college at the tender age of 26 was a busboy at the original Chili's restaurant. I was sort of underachieving and stayed with the company, was a manager and then a general manager, and then was the first director of training. One of my first job challenges was to open 20 restaurants in a year with a training team. So I really understand what it takes to do what you folks do on a daily basis, and have a lot of respect for what you do. And hopefully that gives me some street cred. I put some numbers up on the board. I want to give you a little bit of an idea about the type of background checks that we've done, the numbers for People Matter over the last year. And in the left-hand corner, you'll see that there were 10,200 applicants screened, Each of those applicants had 3 elements or 3 different components, which totaled to 30,000 searches. There were the turnaround time in the bottom right-hand corner of 3.52 hours is really not indicative of how fast this process can be. It could actually be a lot faster, but there's some nuances that we're going to cover in a few minutes. In the upper right-hand corner, this number is a very telling statistic. We were talking about this yesterday. 840 applicants, or 8.19% criminal hit ratio, which a lot of people would be surprised by that in the food service or convenience store industry. Typically, that demographic has a higher hit rate, and the national average is really closer to 10%. So I think this says a lot about the type of folks who are using the system in People Matter. Okay, there we go. Now, if you take that 8.19 number, what that means is that somewhere between 8 and 9 out of every 10 applicants that you screen is going to be clear and not a problem, and that's great. However, it only takes one, and I was thinking about this overnight. There's a local ice cream store operator. They got about 10 locations. They found out a couple of years ago that they had, of course, unintentionally hired a sex offender. That was front page news in the newspaper, and so if you stop and think about the damage that something like that can do in today's world, when you can go viral in 30 minutes with anything that happens in your restaurant or your convenience store, you can get the idea that it really only takes one person to create a real headache for you. And we're going to keep this really simple. There's only this is about risk management. That's really the issue here, is how do you manage your risk? And I would submit to you that outside of actually going into business, that the riskiest thing you do on a daily basis is hire people, because you're responsible for everything that your employees do, all their actions, what they say, everything. And that certainly translates into turnover, and you put those two things together and you have not only a tremendous amount of risk, but a tremendous amount of expense as well. So I would say to you that doing nothing is really not an option. You really should be doing something. The benefit of being integrated with People Matter is not only do you get the efficiencies of being integrated in the system, but you get all the tools at your disposal. One of them happens to be background checks, and that's going to be our focus today. Before we get into talking about background checks, I really wanted to introduce you to a few elements. You may know about these, but I want to make sure we're clear on this. In the upper left-hand corner, you see County Criminal Search. That is a felony misdemeanor search actually at the courthouse level, and it is the most accurate way to search criminal records, period, end of story. That fact is beyond dispute. If you move to the right, you see the multi-jurisdictional criminal database search, or what we call the MJS. You'll also hear that described as a national criminal search, and I want to be very clear about something. There's only one national criminal search, and it's managed by the FBI, and none of us, unless you're in the banking industry or you're a government entity, have access to it. So we as restaurant operators or convenience store owners or whatever do not have access to the FBI database. But you'll hear people say, oh, it's a national criminal search. There is no such thing. Now, here's what's in that database. It's a compilation of counties, not every county, but some, corrections institution, the Department of Prisons, whatever, probation records. AOC stands for Administrator of Courts. And then you'll see also national sex offender data in there. And let me give you an example of what can happen in one of these searches. We can run a background check on someone and get nothing at the county level, but get a record from, say, the Texas Department of Corrections saying that person was sentenced to prison time. Well, now we've got to go and find out what happened, because that's really not enough to report. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about multi-jurisdictional databases. They're very popular. They are very fast. They're relatively inexpensive. However, they do have some challenges when you're dealing with them. They are not perfect by any means. In the bottom left-hand corner, the address history report, or the Social Security trace, is how that report is titled. And what that is a record of every place that someone has ever used their Social Security number. Typically, that's their address. It doesn't have to be, but typically it can be. These records go back to the mid-'80s. So rather than believe that when an applicant tells you that I've lived in Dallas all my life, for example, this address history tells us where they've actually been and gives us the ability to check criminal records in that area. In the bottom right-hand corner, just as an FYI, criminal records are indexed, meaning that they're organized by legal name and date of birth. The legal name is the name on someone's government-issued ID, driver's license, state-issued identification card, etc., and their date of birth. Social Security numbers are not used. That's a very popular misconception in our industry, that people can use Social Security numbers. They do not apply, and you very rarely see them. Now, when we talk about multi-jurisdictional criminal database searches, which is far and away the most popular search that People Matter clients use, the difference in our particular search is that if you go back and think about that address history, you have your name is Thomas. You might have Tom. You might have Tommy. You might have the initial T. Our MJS actually mines the address history report and searches every name iteration against the criminal database, and also checks it against the National Sex Offender Database. So if you happen to have a female who's been married multiple times, and they have multiple names, and those names are not cross-referenced in criminal records most of the time, that search checks those names against the criminal database. If you have an employee whose culture may hyphenate those names, then it checks every iteration of the hyphen, whether it's the first half or the second half or both together. This is a key feature and benefit of this multi-jurisdictional database search. Now, inside the People Matter system, there are three packages for you to select from today. And I'm going to start on the far right and it's titled Fastest, and that's the multi-jurisdictional database criminal search, which includes the National Sex Offender and the address history report. And the time service on that can be 10 seconds or it can be 30 minutes. On the average, it's between 0 and 1 hour. And what will slow that down, if you remember the example I mentioned a few seconds ago, where someone has records from the Corrections Bureau, we have to go and search those out. That can slow it down. Most of the time it's resolved in the same day. Not always, but most of the time. The middle search is what we call the faster search. That's the basic, but it adds one county search, usually the county of residence. So we're actually going to send someone to the county courthouse and search felony and misdemeanor records. That average time is right around 20 hours. And the last option on your left is what I call the fast search, and that includes the intermediate as well as a search of, it actually includes every county of residence over the last 7 years. That's normally between 2 and 3 counties per person. It also includes employment verification, so we would actually call their previous employers and verify that they did work there as they say they did. That includes the National Sex Offender, etc. So, which one is the best one for you? In terms of accuracy, I have to tell you that the faster search in the middle that includes the county search is probably the more accurate search. But I do know, again, back to my days in the restaurant world, that you guys operate under tremendous time pressure, and it is critical that you take that into account. Also, you've got an expense issue. So you've got to really figure out which is the best one for your particular operating model. And certainly that would vary by the types of positions that people work in. The manager, the bartender, the cashier who's handling money might want to spend a little more time and money to make sure that person doesn't have a history of theft. But if it's just someone that's going to be, an everyday worker for you, you can certainly use the basic or the intermediate, and it's better than doing nothing, and much better than that, actually. Now, again, back to time and money. The real issue today in criminal background checks, everybody wants it now, and I firmly believe that everybody believes that there's a big bucket of data out there, that if you want to find out about somebody, you just go take your ladle and dip it into that bucket, and you'll get all the data that you want. And that is not true. There are a lot of companies out there that sell raw data, and because of that, people have this perception that things can happen instantly. Well, the problem with that is it creates a lot of legal issues, and let me tell you how that's manifesting itself right now. Last year, some of you may know that the EEOC came out with revised guidelines regarding the use of criminal records in your employment process, and prior to their new rules in April, they had taken the position that you were only entitled as an employer to have conviction data. So you couldn't find out if someone had been arrested, and that's because they determined that minorities were arrested disproportionately more than majorities, and so they thought that was discriminatory, and they said, you can't do that, we don't like it. Well, now what they've come back and said is that you can not only not use arrest records, but if you're going to use convictions, you have to take in a lot of considerations before you can use them. And they've really said very clearly that to deny employment on the basis of any criminal conviction is discriminatory. And we could talk about 2 days on that, but we're limited to 20 minutes, so I'm just going to leave that with you. Move to the blue block on the right. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is the new sheriff in town. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, which governs this process, has been overseen by the Federal Trade Commission since it began. On January 1st of this year, Congress created the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They actually became in force, and they are now going to be sharing enforcement with the Federal Trade Commission, and I have every reason to believe that they will be putting a lot of pressure on employers to make sure that they're getting right. Not to be a cynic, but just maybe to justify their existence, but certainly it does illustrate that there's a lot more focus on this process by the federal government. If you have been watching TV, the Today Show did an expose on the background check industry in November, and it was not a very positive review of the background check industry. 60 Minutes 2 weeks ago did a similar expose on the credit bureaus, and if you saw that, and the credit bureau process and the background check industry are related in that respect, and they're governed almost the same way. So this just tells me that there's a lot of media attention on background checks and how the processes work, but more importantly, how employers are using the information. And so I fully expect plaintiff lawyers to come out and be very, very aggressive in challenging large companies and mid-sized companies and even small companies on how they use background checks. Now, that's why we're going to talk about why it's important to do it right, because what's the reason for all this, I believe, has been companies have been abusing background checks. So let me go back to the beginning of this. You really have two risk factors, and turnover and how you hire your people. And you're going to see some numbers from Tim here in just a second that I think are very impressive in terms of how background checks can, and any sort of pre-employment screening can drive your bottom line. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and certainly be available for any questions down the road. So Tim, tell them about doing something, will you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John. That's great. A lot of awesome info there, so we appreciate that. We thought it would be useful today to really kind of give you some perspective of how background checks specifically work within the People Matter system. So you can see here up on the screen right now, what we're going to do today is actually take you through a demonstration. And in today's demo, what we'll actually show you are two different perspectives. First, we'll actually show you a job applicant and how background checks are presented to them right during the job application. We're also going to show you a perspective of a hiring manager who's responsible for screening applicants, hiring, and onboarding, and who will actually run a background check right through People Matter. So what's important to note is that within People Matter, we allow you to choose which jobs you'd like to run a background check on, which is an important notation because we understand that obviously you don't typically run background checks maybe on every single position. So what we do is we allow you to choose which job, and then we build that consent form right into the application for that specific job. Now within People Matter, once that individual is considered for a position, which we term a candidate, we'll actually have you request additional information from that individual that we don't yet have, and I'll show you that today. Once that information is submitted, a background check can be run and all the results will be shown. So again, what we thought it would be useful to do is just really kind of show you a demo of how that all works within People Matter. So what I've done right here is I've actually pulled up our job application. This is an example of what the People Matter job application would look like. And this is essentially a custom URL that we provide our partners. And that URL could link from things like a careers page on your corporate website, sites like Simply Hired, Career Builder, Indeed, social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, or even Craigslist. So the point being that we provide you a lot of flexibility with where you might want to drive your applicant flow. What's also important to note is that People Matter is a fully bilingual system. Pardon me. So we are available in both English and Spanish, and that includes our support as well. So People Matter provides support via Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that is bilingual. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and click on this Get Started button, at which point I can type in here a city, state, or zip code nearest to me that I'd like to apply to. So walk through some very simple steps here and point something out here in a moment. If I select a location, you'll notice here we have our application steps over to the left. And what's important to note is that when I select a job, you'll notice these application steps are going to change and a background check gets added. So within People Matter, again, we try to provide you just some very kind of simple workflows for that job applicant. So I'm going to provide just some insight here into the way our job application is configured. You'll notice here, pardon me, I've pre-filled in some of this information. You can see it display. My contact information displays. Of course, I can type in things like my availability. You'll also notice here that these job applications are completely configurable. So it's totally tied to the job that's being selected and the position that's being applied for as well. So I'm going to walk through just some basic steps just to give you a feel for the job application. You'll see there's things like employment history and references that I can input. And now we've come to an important step that we really wanted to focus on today, and that's the background check acknowledgement. So you'll notice here that I can actually consent to this background check being run right here on the screen. So you'll notice again, just to recap, the background check was only represented or displayed for me because of the job that I chose. And now we're actually providing the consent that a background check may be run if I'm to be considered for this position. So I add my consent here and provide an e-signature. I hit next and then submit that job application, and I get a nice big check mark saying, congratulations, all of your information has been submitted, and of course you'll hear from us shortly. So what I'm going to do right now is kind of put on a different hat and show you now what it's like for a hiring manager to track all of those applicants and, of course, find the best ones. So you'll see here what I've done is I've logged in as that hiring manager, and you'll see I've come to what we call our home screen, which initially provides us some quick links to important areas of the site where I can track all of my applicants, track my background checks, or of course complete things like I-9s, transfers, or any important areas that are specific to my business. You'll also notice a quick what's happening feed that provides managers a messaging system to be able to push out important messages to their hourly level team members. And of course down here towards the bottom right we have our People Matter action items, which again allow you to push out important alerts or to-dos, like maybe a change to a policy that you need acknowledgement or e-signature on. People Matter provides that communication portal for you to push those messages out through your system. What I'm going to do here is quickly click on my Applicants tab. And you'll notice when I do that, what we've really done is try to build you a screen that gives you a lot of quick filtering capabilities to present you with the people that are going to fit your immediate hiring need. So you'll notice here on the screen, I have these filters towards the very top that allow me to track and hire by position. So you'll notice here as I'm doing a few clicks here, it's actually auto-filtering and providing me with the results of those filters as I click through. So you'll notice in just 2 quick clicks, I took 94 applicants down to the 18 best ones that fit that immediate hiring need based on a position or their availability. So you can see the useful tools that are right there at your fingertips. Now let's take a look here at Taylor Watts, who we just submitted an application for. And when I do that, you'll notice here that Taylor has a lot of information in what we call his applicant record that is right here at my fingertips. So you'll notice Taylor provides all of his contact information, which I can reference quickly if I need to get a hold of him. You'll notice also these quick tabs towards the very top allow me to track important information like maybe how many applications he submitted and for what positions, and of course additional items that People Matter can track like assessments and of course their full job application. So for the purpose of today's demo, what we thought we'd do is we'd actually go ahead and make Taylor a candidate. And by making Taylor a candidate, you'll notice here that an additional tool was added to the top of our tabs, which allows me to now run a background check. So if I click on the background checks tab, you'll see here the 3 levels that John was speaking to earlier automatically pop up on my screen. You can see here that I can even view that consent document, pardon me, that Taylor actually submitted when he submitted the job application. So here are the 3 levels of my assessment, or excuse me, my background checks that I can run. Let's go ahead and choose just a basic assessment, or excuse me, background check. And you'll notice when I do that, it's going to require me to provide a link in an email notification to Taylor that I have additional information that is now needed. So you'll notice here that I have a quick link right here on the screen where I can now gather that information from Taylor. So I'm going to request that information. You'll notice when I do that, an automated email pops up, which of course I can edit or add any of my own customized messaging to and push this off to Taylor right from People Matter. So I'm going to go ahead and send that information off to him because I don't really have all the information that I need from Taylor just yet. So what I'm going to do right now is actually pop another screen up, and I'm going to log in really quickly as Taylor to show you what it's like for Taylor to now receive that message and provide that additional documentation. I'm going to do that really quickly here. Looks like we got a quick screen. I'm just going to pop that up. There we go. Okay, let's try one more screen here. There we go. And you'll notice when I do, I'm automatically prompted with that additional information screen. So again, this is information that applicant can completely read through. You'll see all the information is displayed for me right here, where I can read through that additional consent document. I can consent to that background check, and of course now I can provide my additional information, like my social security number and my date of birth. So I can submit that right back to the employer now, and it's going to seamlessly pass that information behind the scenes over to LS screening. So what I can now do here, if I switch screens again, I can now refresh this page, and now that that information has been submitted, it can all be tracked now because LS screening, as John mentioned, really provides us those real-time results. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my background checks tab now that I've refreshed that page, and you'll see upon doing so, I have a background check that's been fed back into my system. Then I can now click on to track all the results right here. So I can mouse through all my results, which again are fed right back seamlessly into People Matter. And as John mentioned, depending on, of course, the background check you might run, would determine the time frame that those results come back. You see this one was obviously very much real time. So one last thing that I would show you, because that obviously gives us kind of a use case scenario with a specific applicant that we're looking at. But if I navigate back just to our home screen, you'll notice here, of course I have my background checks link right here, right from the home screen. So as a manager, this could be super helpful for you, because if I click on my background check link now, you'll notice here I can track all of my submission statuses, the dates those items were sent out, or the response dates right here. So I have one quick dashboard to view all my results and track all my statuses right within People Matter. So again, we thought it would be kind of useful just to give you a real-world scenario of how you would actually use the background checks right through People Matter. So we thought that was, of course, something we wanted to show you. And now what I thought we would do is actually kind of mouse over here, and I'm going to show you what it's like, or we're actually going to talk about, what it's like with some real live information that Chris Gann has provided us from Double Beef. So having kind of walked through the demo, again, we thought it would be helpful to now give us some real-world data. And as Ginny mentioned at the outset, Chris is the Vice President of Operations for Double Beef Convenience Stores, and they're located in Central Arkansas and it's a business that has about 28 locations, and on any given week employs right around 250 people. So what Chris shared is that WB's was in a position where they needed to do something to really positively affect their labor expense, which by them, or for them, was really by far their largest expense, at what he had indicated more than 3 times their credit card fees, which were a distant second. So they were of the opinion that they really could not just come up with a system that would give them what they wanted internally. So they really kind of needed to look outward for that. And their stated goal was to really improve their workforce, increase their hourly pay, and then decrease the total hours, or basically, as he stated, do more with less. And he knew they needed a partner to do that. So after sitting through a lot of webinars just like this one, they made the decision to choose People Matter. So this next graphic on the screen here really shows some hard numbers that illustrate for WB's success with People Matter. The numbers represent a time frame from August 2012 through January of 2013, so only 7 months. And Chris wanted us to note that these numbers are only from about 25 of their 28 locations, because 3 of their locations actually are a different company within their company that has a bit different reporting capabilities. So these figures are actually for 25 of their locations. So what Chris believed and really wanted to start with the fact that they have had 115 less new hires than the same time frame from the previous year. And what's pretty interesting with that is that they provide all of their new hires 1 free uniform shirt. So they have saved almost $2,100 just in shirts. Of course, added to that is that training has now proved to be a huge savings model for them. So as Chris notated, when really allocating their training hours, they have a full complement of their employees plus the new hire that is training. So that those hours are really 1-for-1 extra hours. With the reduction in those new hires, they've seen a reduction in training hours of over 3,400 hours, which represented a savings of almost $30,000 to their company. Next, of course, there are the tax credits. Those come from the government for applying certain individuals that might qualify. And WB concluded early on that this process would be virtually impossible for them to do without an automated system that People Matter provides. So just so far, in those 7 months, you can see almost $12,000 here. And tax credits combined with those training hour savings that we talked about alone represented 100% return on investment in under 7 months. The last 2 sets of numbers that we wanted to notate here are turnover and discharges. So Chris thought it was important to really group these together because the benefits of reducing these numbers are harder to put an exact dollar amount on, but are just as valuable. So regardless, you can see a substantial reductions here. Their turnover is almost cut in half. And if you add the other 3 stores that we talked about earlier, you believe it'll likely be more than half. And with the discharges, they separated 143 less people than last year. So as you can see, there's really substantial numbers that WB's has seen as a direct effect on their bottom line, which is really, really interesting data, I think. So with that, we just wanted to kind of thank you, obviously, for your time today. And I know that Ginny has some questions that we wanted to field from you all, so we will go ahead and kind of turn it over to the Q&A section of the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Tim, and thanks, John. So we've gotten a lot of great questions so far, and we'd like to answer some of those now. If you have a question that you'd still like to submit, there's plenty of time. Just type your questions into the box on the GoToWebinar panel. Now, also, if you have questions for Chris Gann of WB's, he has agreed to address those questions with you one-on-one later. And so you can also submit those questions here, and we'll make sure to get those to Chris. But if you have a question for John or Tim, we'll answer those now. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the first question. And the first question is to you, John. Someone's wondering, how far back does background check data run? How many years back does that run?
That's a pretty popular question. It really varies by county. Towards the early 90s, counties began realizing that data was going to be a big part of data research was going to be a big thing, and so they really started doing a better job. Of course, the internet helped out a lot. So typically you'll see by county a minimum of 15 years worth of data. Some counties go back to the early 80s and 70s. I think the most popular answer is we go back as far as the county lets us go back. We report everything there. In almost every state, there's no time limitation on how far back you can report criminal convictions. That's the answer.
Great. Thanks, John. Now, I see a couple of you have your hands raised. If you'd like to ask a question, if you can actually submit that in the question panel, we'll make sure to get it from you there. But we're unable to unmute you to ask a question. So if you have your hand raised, just make sure you type your question in. So with that, I'll get to the second question, which, John, I think you'll probably be able to answer this, but you may need a little help from Tim. I'm not sure. So what happens if a candidate does not sign the consent form within the system? Are you still able to run a background check? Or kind of what typically happens with the candidate at that point, John?
Well, the short answer is if they do not sign the consent form, you should not run the background check. The Fair Credit Reporting Act really makes employers responsible for two things. One, to disclose to the applicant that they're going to run a background check, and to get the consent of the applicant. That's one. And the second one is to the notice of adverse action, which we'll probably talk about in a few minutes. So short answer is if they don't sign it, don't run it.
Got it. Tim, this question is for you. Can we control who within our company can run and see the results of background checks within People Matter Hire?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question. So People Matter has, what we kind of liken to a role-based or access level-based system. So depending on what kind of position or role you have within your business could determine different functions or items in the system that you could actually see or functions that you could provide. So absolutely. A lot of folks actually have our system structured so that background checks may be run, from their corporate office or by a regional manager, and they take that access out of the hands of maybe the general manager of that specific business. So yeah, we really are able to configure the system to allow for your kind of business workflows that are already in place. We just kind of map our system to fit your current business practices.
Great. And John, this next question is for you, and it's regarding adverse action. And so who typically handles adverse action? Is that Ellis Screening or People Matter, or does the client handle that? And what's the process?
Well, the notice of adverse action is the second a requirement under the Fair Credit Reporting Act that I spoke about a few seconds ago. And basically, just to tell you what it is, if you decide not to hire an applicant and you've run a background check on them and the background check contributed in whole or in part to your decision, then you're required to send the applicant what's called a notice of adverse action and a summary of their rights under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The letter basically says, we're not going to hire you because we ran a background check. I'm paraphrasing. And if you have any questions about your background check, you can contact, in this case, it would be LS Screening, but it's whoever's doing your background check. At that point, they have the ability to dispute the information, get a copy of their report, etc. Now, who's required to do that? The employer is required to do that. You can outsource that responsibility to your provider or to any third party that you want, but that does not take away your responsibility under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That's the answer.
Great. Thanks, John. So the next question is for Tim. Tim, do these background checks, do they check for illegal immigrants, or can you do that within the People Matter system?
Yeah, it's typically handled actually through a different component of the People Matter system, which is our I-9 and E-Verify program. So we have, within People Matter, we're a fully authorized E-Verify agent. So you can fully build that process right into People Matter. And we provide those workflows. And in fact, actually, as part 3 of the screening series that we're actually doing, we're hosting a webinar at the end of next month, March 28th, which is going to be all about I-9s, E-Verifies, and how that can actually work and help out your business. And any additional information that you might want on that, of course, you can find right on our website at peoplematter.com. But yeah, the whole, the illegal kind of checking with the government is actually fed back through People Matter through our E-Verify program.
Great, thanks, Tim. So yeah, if you guys have questions about E-Verify 9.9, make sure to join us for our third in this webinar series on March 28th. More info to come. So this next question, I think, John, you could probably handle. If a company starts running background checks and they haven't done that in the past, is it necessary to run background checks on all current employees or only new employees?
It is not necessary. You're not required to go back and screen your current employees at all. Some companies choose to do that. It certainly does create some issues in the workplace with disclosure, because now you're going to be looking at applicants and potentially terminating their employment on the basis of a background check. So as you can imagine, it's kind of a delicate issue, but there is no requirement to do so. Once you make the decision to start screening people, as with all things related to human resources, consistency is the key. So you need to screen everyone by job position in the same manner. Don't screen, if you have two servers, for example, don't screen one once, one screen another way. Be consistent throughout your screening process. That's it.
Looks like we have time for about 2 more questions. So I have 1 more for John and 1 more for Tim. But if you guys still have questions, feel free to type them in. Any questions we didn't get to, we will make sure to follow up with you directly after the webinar and answer those questions. So I'll do 1 more for Tim and then 1 more for John. Tim, can you assign background checks to specific jobs only within People Matter Hire?
Absolutely, yeah. So the way the system's really configured is that we acknowledge typically that most people don't run background checks on every single job. So it's a really easy configuration in our settings area where you essentially just choose which jobs you'd like to run that background check on, and that would initiate that consent form right during the job application. So you can totally configure it by the job that's being selected during the job application.
Great, thanks, Tim.
Don't ask.
Okay, actually, let's see. Looks like we're about out of time, so we're actually just going to wrap up there. But as I mentioned, we've got a couple other questions here that we just didn't get a chance to answer. So I apologize for that. We are going to follow up with you guys directly. If you have questions after this, you can also reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure to get your questions answered if I'm not able to answer them myself. So we really appreciate everybody joining us, and we hope to see you on March 28th for our I-9 and E-Verify webinar. Have a great day.